Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the BlackBrazilToday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today is February 21st. And when I first, I set out this morning to go to work, and when I first looked at my cell phone, and I saw that the date was February 21st, it immediately struck me like, man, what happened on this day? There's something that's jarring my memory that says there's something, something happened on this day. I'm a person who keeps up with dates, dates that are important to me, whether it be, somebody's birthday or, something historical. And all I have to do is see the date, and it's already going to pop in my mind that something important happened on that day, or I should be calling somebody to wish them a happy birthday, or this is the day that somebody passed away. It could be anything, a tragic world event or something. Obviously people will think of, days like September 11th, 2001. But, there's plenty of dates like that throughout world history. And this, as I was driving down the street, it wasn't coming to me immediately what this date meant. Matter of fact, I think I started, recording a message for one of my friends through one of my apps. And at that very moment, that's when it struck me. I says, okay, it's February 21st. This was the day. One of the most outspoken, memorable, important civil and human rights leaders that the world has known, Malcolm X, was assassinated on this day 58 years ago. Every time I think about it, I'm like, wow, it takes me back to, watching the various Malcolm X documentaries that I've seen, the epic film by Spike Lee in 1992. A lot of things come to my mind when I think of Malcolm X. When his life story, his autobiography, his thoughts, his speeches, when I became aware of them, I became just fascinated with, everything about Malcolm X. And as he struck me, people know that, there's a lot of people around the world who were affected by his words for, what he stood for. And this is also the case in Brazil. Now, the reason why I point this out is because, I remember it was probably my second trip, maybe second or third trip to Brazil. And I was hanging out in this city called Itabuna in Bahia. And I just remember there was this university professor. And, it was me, him, it was like three of these rappers that I knew. And we were all, sitting around just talking. And I remember him saying to me that, here in Brazil, we're not allowed to have our own. Everything is, comes out of the United States. We're not allowed to have our own history, our own images. And then he pointed to his T-shirt, and it was like I don't know if it was like a Looney Tunes T-shirt or something. And what he was just saying, as a college professor, it's like, Brazil is a country where a lot of people look at it as, America's backyard. It's another country that's been colonized by the United States. That's how a lot of people see it. And this took me back to maybe a year or two before that time on my first trip to Salvador Bahia. And I just remember, I often tell this story. I had spent some time learning about, important Afro-Brazilians. And I just remember I was walking around in Salvador. It was somewhere around the Pelourinho area, the famous, it's been turned into a tourist spot for a number of decades now. The Pelourinho is famous because it was a place where Black Brazilian slaves were publicly whipped. Pelourinho actually means whipping post. But I was walking around in that first visit, and I remember, the two people I was hanging out with, these two baianos, it was a woman and a guy. And we stopped into this restaurant. I remember looking on the wall and seeing this photo of the famous Afro-Brazilian anthropologist Lelia Gonzalez. And I was like, wow, this Lelia Gonzalez. And the two Black Brazilians that I was with, neither one of them, they were looking at each other like, who's that lady? And it just struck me that neither one of them were familiar with how important, Lelia Gonzalez was. They had never even heard of her. And then later on that same trip, I met this guy. I was introduced to him by this couple that was from Boston. They would come to Bahia all the time. And they introduced me to him. It was he's a Black man. We were the same age. Obviously we're still the same age, but he reminded me of somebody from like the Marley family. So, he had lighter skin, but he had these long dreadlocks, and he was like, I don't know, maybe 5'4", 5'5", or whatever. And I remember after I got to meet him and we started talking, because, on that first trip, I didn't speak very good Portuguese at all, but he spoke pretty good English. And he showed me around. He introduced me to these inner city youth that he was working with. He would have like Black history classes with them. I don't know if he did it on every weekend, but whatever. So the two of us were hanging out. And I remember we were walking along the Baja region in Salvador, popular tourist spot. And we got to talking about, he asked me, how did I get into Brazil? And I told him the whole story, but to that point, obviously, I had been studying Brazil for about 9 months at that point. And I told him about the Africana Encyclopedia, and then I told him about Abdias do Nascimento, who I've talked about in other videos. And I remember him, I'll never forget, he looked at me and he says, yeah, I like Nascimento, I like I read his stuff too, but I prefer Malcolm X because Malcolm X had a Black wife. And at that moment, it struck me like, what do you mean? He was like, well, Nascimento's married to a white American woman who's like 40 years younger than him. The thought had never entered my mind because, I had read two of Nascimento's books where, they were published in English. So those were two of the first books that I got in my book collection about the situation in Brazil. And that's a moment that I'll never forget because, I had never even thought about who Nascimento's wife was. But the point was, he was very much familiar with Malcolm X. And this was in the year 2000, So that's what it reminded me because for a number of years, only in academic circles did people even know who Abdias do Nascimento was. He died in 2011 at the age of 97. But even to this day, I think it's more likely that Black Brazilians will know who Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, who they were versus their own, human rights and civil rights activists. So I wanted to talk about this piece that I did 2 years ago, because this was from February 21st, 2021. And at the time, it said 56 years without Alhaj Malik Al-Shabazz, how Malcolm X, quote unquote, dangerous mind helped shape Brazilian rap in the 1990s. Brazilian rap, hip hop is something that it's a whole nother world. I mean, I say this frequently, in reality, Brazilian hip hop rap, the whole culture, the history of its most important rappers is something that I could create a whole blog on. I try to cover things, cover as many things as I can without overwhelming people with one particular topic. So I noticed that the images and the words of Malcolm X started springing up in Brazil within the Black community. I can't remember. It was sometime in the early 2000s, I would say, maybe in the, 2007 or so. That's when I started noticing it. I'm saying it could have been around longer than that. But every year that I would go down to visit, I would see stronger and stronger evidence of the influence of Malcolm X. And so you hear some of this influence in some of Brazilian hip hop. And this is what I wanted to talk about. So today, obviously, this article is 2 years old because it's actually 58 years now without Malcolm X. But let me get into this piece. Some very popular Brazilian rappers who, they explore how important the existence of Malcolm X was in their political thought and their development of Black identity and Black consciousness, right? So today, February 21st, at the time, 2021. And at the time, it marked the 56th anniversary of the murder of one of the greatest anti-racist activists of all time, Malcolm X. I am very much a person that connects to important historical dates and dates of birthdays of people, and I have a connection with or people who have inspired me for one reason or another. These figures and events can be things from history in general, Black history, birthdays of all sorts of people. For example, I know that basketball icon Michael Jordan had a birthday on February 17th. This year, he just turned 60. Another NBA star, Charles Barkley's birthday was on the 20th, which was yesterday. He turned 60. And then my first, I'll say one of my first heroes in sports was Julius Dr. J. Irvin's birthday, who will turn, 73 tomorrow on February 22nd. We know that actually a few weeks ago, the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. was celebrated on January 15th. And Afro-Brazilian activist intellectual Lelia Gonzalez, who I was just talking about, she would have turned 86 on February 1st. Of course, that would be 88 now. On March 14th, we will celebrate the birthdays of the aforementioned Afro-Brazilian activist Abdias do Nascimento, the famed writer Carolina de Jesus, as well as now the 5th year of the assassination of Rio de Janeiro City Councilwoman Marielle Franco. And I want to be clear, not to say that we're celebrating her assassination, but it's more of a thing of remembering, her career, her voice as a public spokesperson for the Black Brazilian struggle, Black Brazilian women, etc. It's unbelievable. It's going to be 5 years this March. Still an unsolved murder. So the words, thoughts, and speeches of Malcolm X were instrumental in the raising of Black consciousness in a whole generation of Afro-Brazilians. Every year on Afro-Brazilian oriented social networks, I see posts that recognize the birth and death of Malcolm X. This year was the same. Waking up this morning, I hadn't even had time to think of what today's date was. Again, that happened today. But soon after connecting to a few of my social network profiles, I began to see photos of Malcolm popping up and people expressing his importance in their lives and reminding me what today was. So these, you see this all over the internet. Malcolm's books, his speeches, they've translated many of his works. You see all of this. If you were to read them in English, you would know very well that these are some of Malcolm X's most famous, sound bites. This one, for example, that's saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will make you hate the people that are being oppressed and love the people that are oppressing. A lot of people, we're familiar with that phrase. You see this guy here, he's actually wearing a t-shirt with that same phrase on it. If I was to go to YouTube, you would find a bunch of videos by Malcolm X that have been somebody have either overdubbed them with Portuguese words, or they just put subtitles on them. So this is one of his famous speeches, Quem te ensinou? It's the speech where Malcolm is asking, who taught you to hate your nose? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair and the skin on your body? Senor Malcolm, and X in Portuguese is X. So Senor Malcolm X. Você odeia todos os brancos. They're asking him, Malcolm X, do you hate all white people? Again, who taught you to hate yourself? Malcolm X sobre os liberais brancos. Malcolm X about white liberals. Here they're analyzing the difference in the speeches between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Diferença do discurso do Malcolm X e Martin Luther King. Let me see here. Malcolm X, frases e citações do pensamento do Malcolm X. So what is it? Phrases and quotations of the thoughts of Malcolm X, right? And on it goes. Well, okay, so this is not Malcolm X. We know that TV series. Here, there's one where he's talking about, it's a famous scene from the Spike Lee film from 1992, Cor de Jesus. And Malcolm X is debating with this prison, I guess, pastor, or I don't know if he's a priest. Well, it looks like a priest here. He's debating him about what color Jesus Christ must have been. Very famous scene. Here's another one, Malcolm X por qualquer meio necessário. I'm quite sure you can make that out even if you don't understand Portuguese. It says by any means necessary. So, you know, they have been sub here. Wow, just so many of them. Negro da Casa. This is the famous House Negro discussion from the Spike Lee film. Another one would, well, this is in English here, but you get the point. Black Brazilians who identify with Malcolm X have translated a whole lot of his stuff online so that these speeches can reach masses of people who don't understand English, right? Anyway, keep going. It is also quite clear that Malcolm X was aware of the Black population in Brazil. I've read at least 2 speeches given by Malcolm in which he mentioned Brazil's Black population. As a matter of fact, it was his speech given in my hometown of Detroit, Michigan on February 14, 1965, exactly 1 week before his death, that Malcolm mentioned Brazil's African descendants. In that speech, Malcolm acknowledged that at the time, Brazil had 2/3 of what we call color or non-white, saying that their population was 2/3 non-white. In Rochester, New York, 2 days later, he mentioned this again, saying 2/3 of the people in Brazil are dark-skinned people, the same as you and I. They are people of African origin, African ancestry, African background. So Malcolm was plainly aware of the Black population in Brazil. He was talking about this in the mid-60s, again, just right before he was assassinated. Again, you'll see some Instagram pages of people talking about Malcolm X. Mais perigoso criação no mundo, em qualquer sociedade, em homem sem nada a perder. So he's talking about the most dangerous creation in the world, in any society, is a man who has nothing to lose, okay? This is Brazilian Instagram profiles. Remember Malcolm X on February 21st, 2021. Again, you find a lot of homages to Malcolm X on both the day he was assassinated, as well as his birthday on May 19th. Now, even though Brazil for decades has promoted itself as a racial democracy, many Black rappers in Brazil found similarities in Malcolm's speeches about how African Americans and Afro-Brazilians were treated. And through their lyrics, they spread the legacy of Malcolm's words and helped him present to millions of Afro-Brazilians who may have never been exposed to him otherwise. Through these rappers, the legacy of Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and others live on. I see this almost every day. And in a song released last August, we were reminded of this once again. Again, Malcolm X's Dangerous Mind helped shape Brazilian rap in the 1990s. This is a piece by Juca Guimarães and Anderson Hebreu. A Black activist murdered in 1965 inspired a talented generation of Brazilian rappers. A rereading of Voz Ativa, meaning active voice. The Racionais MC's song that quotes the activist was released by rappers Dexter, Coruja, BC1, Djonga, KLJ, and DJ Will. Now, if you've never heard of them, Racionais MCs is one of the most important hip-hop groups ever in Brazilian hip-hop. They emerged sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. I've always described them as like a mix between Public Enemy and NWA. Racionais MCs are legendary in the hip-hop game. They are responsible for the raising of consciousness of perhaps millions of Black Brazilians, right? Again, you could create a whole blog just on the importance of the Racionais MCs. A captivating leader, a great speaker, and a man with a dangerous mind were some of the characteristics attributed to the activist Malcolm X in the reports and recordings made by the FBI, the United States Federal Investigation Agency. Beyond the concern he provoked in the American government during the tensions of the struggle for civil rights, the activist's active voice reverberated in anger and indignation of young Blacks around the planet for decades. In Brazil, the rap groups formed in the late 80s and early 90s were strongly influenced by the speeches of Malcolm X, who was assassinated in early 1965 at the age of 39 during a lecture and in front of his wife and daughters. Malcolm was blunt when speaking about police violence and racism, like something that Black Brazilians can very much identify with. His speech had immediate identification with the reality of young Black Brazilians. Every case of police brutality against a Black person follows the same pattern. They attack you, put you upside down, then they take you to court and accuse you of aggression. What kind of democracy is this? Said the activist in one of his many speeches. The rappers Dexter, Mano Brown, who is he's the lead rapper of Racionais MCs, DJ KLJ, among other names of Brazilian rap, were influenced by Malcolm X's ideas related to the valuation of Black culture and self-esteem of Black people. The artists followed his teachings of searching for knowledge. I pray that you grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit in that world, Malcolm recommended. Okay, so you have a picture here, Racionais MC, Voz Ativa, active voice. And the original version is from 1992. In 1992, the group Racionais MCs released the EP Siga a Seu Caminho, which means follow your path, with the song Voz Ativa, meaning active voice, which nominally quotes Malcolm X and relates the main problems of structural racism at the time. We need a popular credited leader like Malcolm X in other times. It was in America. One who is Black to the bone, one of our own, and who will rebuild our pride that has been made into wreckage, says the lyrics written by one Mano Brown at the age of 22. So this is Mano Brown here. You know, has on a mask. Obviously, this was in 2021, you know, in the middle of the pandemic. This is Dexter, Mano Brown. This is Djonga, very popular rapper out of the state of Minas Gerais. In 2020, Dexter invited rappers Djonga and Caruja to re-record the song, which gained relevance in a moment of high visibility of the anti-racist agenda and against police violence. The beat of the 2020 version is a re-recording by DJ KLJ in partnership with DJ Will. I went through situations of racism every day, and in every choice I went through in life. Rap brought me something different in life. It brought hope and fueled dreams, says Dexter. Dexter, this guy right here with the X hat on, is a good friend of Mano Brown and the group, and invited two rappers of the new generation of rap to make this rereading of a classic rap song from Sao Paulo from the 1990s. Mano Brown participates in the recording of the clip, which was shot at Favela da Felicidade, Jardim São Luís, in the south zone of Sao Paulo. The sound beat was constructed by Jay and his son, DJ Will, or KLJ. Let me see. Dexter, who is a rap million, more than 20 years under his belt with 5 albums and 2 DVDs, speaks of honor and love in re-recording this classic. I'm very much for the love in things. To re-record the best group in the country, the best lyricists too, I couldn't do this alone. I worry a lot about the future with what is happening, with what came from the periphery and what is ours. This aroused my interest in rescuing something from the past that could talk to people about the responsibility of being and doing, says Dexter. The song, Voz Ativa, originally released in 1992, addresses issues such as racism, police violence, the Black movement, and Black youth. This song portrays everything that happened in 1992 and is now happening again, but in fact, it has always happened too, explains Dexter. The 2020 version of the song brings something really cool for Brazilian rap with the union of generations. Djonga and Caruja, members of the new version of rap, were not born in the Racionais MCs. They were not born when the Racionais MCs first released the track. Both, however, were deeply influenced by it. It was a great joy and also a sorrow. If we were talking about it, racism, just to revisit the work in a totally artistic way, fine. We are singing it because it is a song we like and it touched our hearts. But everything that's in the lyrics is still happening, and that's what makes us sad, affirms Djonga. Rapper Caruja emphasizes the importance of the dialogue between generations in rap and the power of these encounters to inspire new lyrics. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to record a classic to be called by my teachers. Anything I say won't be enough to express what they represent in my life. Dexter and Brown have written very beautiful pages in rap history. They were pages that I read a lot. Whenever I go to write something, I try to look at those pages that inspired me, says Caruja. Voz Ativa was written in 1992 under the influence of the Black struggle for survival, a very striking and recurring theme in the group's lyrics. Malcolm X, quoted in the lyrics, was the inspiration for the writing of this sound. I was reading Malcolm X's text at the time, and I identified a lot with what he wrote. The lyrics are me talking to him in the book, saying that here in Brazil, things are the same, but that now the Black man has an active voice and was willing to fight, says Mano Brown, the author of the lyrics and rapper of the Racionais MCs. At the same time, the lead rapper of the Racionais MCs made contact with the MNU, the Movimento Negro Unificado, meaning the Unified Black Movement. It's Brazil's, widely known Black civil rights movement and organizations. A political group organized against racism since 1978, again, the Movimento Negro. It was the meeting of generations. It was already that institutional racism that we have today. There were people who defended that there was no racism, that this was the country of miscegenation, of the cordiality of the races. In this climate, I made the song, remembers Mano Brown. The will to re-record the song and make the clip or the video was driven by the recent anti-racist demonstrations around the world, especially in Brazil and the United States, where Black people like João Pedro Matos and George Floyd were murdered by military police officers. The lyrics are one of Racionais MC's most critical of racism and the exaltation of Black resistance. Since the creation of the Penal Code in 1890, in Brazil, everything was divided between the bourgeoisie and the poor, which were the Blacks, and it never changed. The song Voz Ativa is our look at the life of Black people in this country, comments KLJ. The DJ kept in his memory the atmosphere in the studio at the time of recording the song almost 30 years ago. I remember the recording in 1992. We had no resources, no equipment. There were no technicians specialized in rap as we have today. We arrived at the studio with the ideas. It was about opening the forest. We spent 6 to 7 hours recording, remembers KLJ. Directed by João Weiner, Melson Soares, and Ricardo Souza, the video recalls the atmosphere of the American rap audiovisual productions of the 1990s with a creative addition of cuts and effects, repeating the mixture of a classic and modern aesthetic. The new version of Voz Ativa will be released on August 21st, accompanied by a video shot in Favela da Felicidade in the South Zone of Sao Paulo. So this is just one of a number of articles where the name Malcolm X definitely comes up. And I know you probably get the feeling that this article was more about Brazilian rappers, the old school rappers versus the new school of the most popular rappers in the country, but it's very much influenced by the speeches and the political thought of Malcolm X. Huge influence in Brazil. So it's something that we should keep in mind. Like Malcolm X was just not a figure whose words influenced African Americans. He influenced millions of African descendants around the world, as well as non-Blacks. So I just wanted to, on this day, remembering Malcolm X on February 21st, the day that he was murdered 58 years ago. And I just wanted to give a vision of his importance to Brazilian rappers, and how can we say the development of Black consciousness among Black Brazilians. Anyway, just wanted to leave that there. As I've said, there are other articles on this blog that talk about Malcolm X. If you want to go there and read them, because I'll eventually get to them and post them on this YouTube channel as well. So with that said, I'm going to close out the video here. Hope you learned something here. Hope you appreciated the material. If you like the material, definitely consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video. Drop a comment in the comment section. Always helps. And what else? You can click on that notification button so you make sure that you see my videos as soon as they go up. So with that said, hope you like this video, and I hope you come and check out the next one.